All right, this week's lab, we're going to go over using vCenter server to manage our ESXi hypervisors. If you look at this picture, if we remember from our discussion the first day of class, I talked about vCenter server, and I said, hey, if you have one hypervisor and your machines are running on that hypervisor becomes critical. If that hypervisor goes down, your VMs are down, and you have to manually intervene. And I drew vCenter server above it and said, unless you get this piece of management software, that can be useful for managing your hypervisors. So now with vCenter Server, we're going to set things up so that the actual hypervisor becomes less important, and as long as we have more than one hypervisor, then things can continue to live. Something not shown on this little picture, we need shared storage for all this cool stuff to work. So I already have the vCenter server, already have shared storage. You need to provide two ESXi hypervisors to the picture. So to get started in the lab, you're going to connect to your hypervisors to the rich net. You're going to make sure they're on the network and everything's working. I'll give you some IP addresses in the lab sheet to use. Once you get all that done, then you're going to connect to the vCenter server at this URL in the browser, and you'll get to this page and it says, hey, you can use the Flash client or you can use the HTML client. I actually logged into both of them. This is the HTML client. It's a little nicer to look at. I already have one of my ESXi hosts in here. You're going to have to add your ESXi host when you get ready to do it. This is the other client. What does it call it? vSphere Web Client Flash. It is the other client. It runs on Flash. It took a long time to load. It was kind of slow. But the lab instructions are written for using this web client, the Flash client. So if you want to have the easiest time completing the lab, you'll want to use this Flash client. When I opened the client in Firefox, this little Lego block showed up, and I had to right-click and allow Flash to run. So if your browser screen is just blank and not doing anything, look around for other things. Also, I'm using Firefox because I've had issues with Google Chrome, and I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but I'm not going to try it while I'm testing this for you guys. So I'm going to use the web client. If you want to use this new HTML client, you can, but I found that things don't line up with my lab instructions, so I don't really want to confuse you. Basically, you right-click and do things over here just like you do in other places, but some of the words don't match up. So back to the vSphere web client. We're going to create a data center, and we're going to add our host to our data center. I've already created a data center called Rich, and I've already added one of my hosts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to create a new data center, because that's what you're going to need to do. So basically, you right-click it, new data center, and then you give it a name. Student. Don't type student, give it your actual name. If we have more than one of you in class, put an abbreviation for your last name. So once you have your data center, you'll be following the steps I'm doing now twice to add both your hosts. So I'm going to add my other host to my data center. So I right-clicked on my data center and added host. I'm going to put the IP address of my host, and I'm going to go through the little wizard. You need to put the username and the, oh my gosh, you saw my IP address. Holy cow. That was horrible. It started with VM. Put the password. It's going to connect out to the host and try to get some stuff. If you had any virtual machines, they would have showed up there. I'm using an eval license because it wasn't working when I had the other license. Am I that what I'm using? The eval license? Yeah. Lockdown mode will make it so that you can only access the ESXi host through the vCenter server. I'm going to leave that disabled. In the real world, that'll be a policy decision based on whether or not you're confident your vCenter server will always be up. Because if your vCenter server goes down, then you have problems. I don't have any VMs on that hypervisor, so that would ask me where I wanted to put them. And then I'm going to hit finish, and hopefully it'll work. So you notice some stuff, it's importing, it's adding the host. There's this little block here right now because it's like an error and you don't know, but it went away. Hey, cool, it went away. So that was awesome. So we're going to get our host in our data center. Once you get both your hosts in your data center, you're going to want to deploy an OVF tool. OVF, you should have one by now. If you don't, I gave you a link to one when we were talking about Lab 3. So you should go find it, deploy it. One thing to make sure of, when you deploy it, give it whatever name you want. When you deploy it, It's going to ask you which data center you want to put it in. Pick your data center. It's going to ask you which host you want to put it on. Pick your host, one of your hosts. I don't care which one. It's going to ask you, I don't know what it's going to ask. It's going to ask something. All right, review details, create details. Select storage. We want to put it on our data store because that's all we have right now. We want to do thin provision. Please do not miss this step. We do not have big enough disks in our workstations for you to be creating a thick provision disk. And if you end up using my stuff in the virtual environment, I definitely don't have big enough disks. So thin provision your disk. Select networks. We only have one network, so go with a VM network. Next, it's ready to complete. I'll hit finish. It's going to start running, and then we'll go talk about some other stuff, and hopefully it'll finish. So the next step in the lab says to run through the create VM process, just so you can see what it looks like. I'm not actually making you create a VM, but if you wanted to create a VM, you do new virtual machine, create a new virtual machine, and basically the steps look very similar to what we have seen before. If we want to create a new one completely, we can do that. Deploy from template. What's the template? We'll talk about those later on in this lab. Clone an existing virtual machine. That's cool. That's not something we can do without vCenter server. So we'll create a new machine. Give it a name. Right. Select compute resource. Where do you want it to go? I don't care. Select storage. Right. Data store is fine because that's all you have right now because you haven't done the next step. How you want it to be compatible with. This is important if you're going to move it around to different things. Select the guest OS. Windows, never. We'll go with our good old CentOS. There we go, CentOS 4. What? 4 or 5? Or later. Not 32-bit. 64-bit. All right, you can change up your virtual hardware setting if you need to attach a ISO. I don't know if I have any ISOs. You'll need to upload it like the olden days. Yeah, I don't have any ISOs up there, so you'll need to upload the ISO before we can continue. But we're not actually continuing. So once you do that, then it'll start and run through the install process like every other VM product we have run with. My OVF file is looks like what, 75 or 85% complete. I don't know which one of that it is. So we will keep moving for a while. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at my instructions so I make sure I'm telling you the right stuff. We're going to try to move one of our hosts to another host. So we have these two hosts in here, and the cool thing about vCenter server, oh, my OVF finished. That's cool. Let's turn that guy on. Power on. All right, the cool thing about having these multiple hosts in vCenter server is you can move things around. So we're going to try to move things around. Is that guy coming on? Web console. Of course, we don't have certificates in the lab, so anytime you see this, go ahead and accept it. Oh, I thought I said turn that thing on. I got an error. That's inconvenient. I knew that was gonna. I suspected that might happen because I forgot to change a setting on one of my hypervisors because I'm running nested virtualization. But I'll fix that in a little while. Maybe I need to fix that now. All right, fine. I'll fix it now. I don't really want to because it's got extra stuff that might confuse you because you're not going to need to do this. But if you're doing this in VMware Player or somewhere else, you might run into this problem. The problem is I'm running nested virtualization. So with my nested virtualization, I have a VMware host at 240.11. Right? This is an actual server that has decent resources. And on this server, I'm running a couple of other ESXi hosts. If you look, I have this server that's running some ESXi hosts, and these are the ones I'm using for the demo. So this guy has a little issue in that when I configured it, I did not change some CPU settings I needed to, and I think I'm going to have to power this off before I can do that. I didn't change some CPU settings that I needed to change. So it was not supporting the nested virtualization. So yeah, so I need to enable that thing, which I need to turn it off. So hey, let's just power it off and hope for the best. Yes. So this right here is what I call extra learning. So if you're trying to do this some other time on your own and you are getting issues, you need to make sure that your VM is set appropriately to support passing through the virtualization settings of the hardware. So now I'm going to change the CPU setting. I get this memory limit thing all the time. I don't know why. Always change it to 0 or delete it. I don't know. One or the other. So now I'm going to expose hardware assist, and I'm going to save that, and I'm going to reload because this happens every time when I have to change that memory setting thing. And I'm going to log in again. And that's not the password because this is my actual password I use for stuff in the lab and not my fake password I use for class. All right, so now we'll go check those settings and see which ones of them stayed because the stupid thing crashed on me. CPU, expose hardware, save. All right, so I think that's what I need to do. So we'll turn that guy back on. It'll take a minute to come on, and we kind of have to wait because that's the guy we need to keep going with our lab. So I could sing a song. I do have a new Vim song I wrote the other day. Do you want me to sing a few bars of that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to sing that. But you could go look it up on my YouTube channel and subscribe. I need subscribers. VMware doesn't want to, not VMware. YouTube doesn't want to pay me anymore because I don't have enough subscribers. So this guy's coming up, and hopefully it'll be up soon. This video is already getting longer than I want it to be. I'm not going to redo it though to make it shorter. This is good learning. Learning is awesome. So if we go back to the web client, I've already done some stuff on this this hypervisor that you're going to have to do on your hypervisor when you get it up, when it comes up. Should be close to coming up. So one of those things we need to do, actually I'm just going to wait. I was going to try to get ahead. Okay, there we go. It's back up. Let's see if it shows back up. All right, cool. It's back up. So let's try to power this guy on now. Power on. Yay, looks like it's coming on. So let's try to open the console again. All right, looks like it's opening the console. Is that in the right interface? Yeah. It's booting, so that's good. So a couple things. Once this boots, your network's probably not going to work, and I made another video to show you how to fix that. So if you log in and do ifconfig and you don't have an actual interface, Ethernet interface, this is loopback. If you don't have an actual Ethernet interface, you need to go watch my other video to figure out how to fix that. So there we go. All right, so we have this host up. We have this ESXi host that it's running on, and we want to do some things. We want to move some of our VMs around because we said, hey, you can move your VM from one host to another. It's so cool. So the way you do that is you go migrate, and then you select what you want to migrate. Change compute resources, so that changes which ESXi host is doing the processing. Change storage only, change both compute and storage. So we'll try to change compute resources only first, and we will theoretically pick the other host, but the other host didn't show up here. And the reason for that is because our disk is on this host. We have the disk on the local data store 1. So we can't move this host around yet. So what we need is shared storage. And a couple things we need to do to get shared storage. One, we need to go to the host, click on settings. This thing comes up. Go to the configuration tab, which I've been there before. Storage adapters. We want to add a storage adapter, iSCSI adapter. Okay. So it's adding our iSCSI software adapter. We want to click on that iSCSI software adapter, and then we want to point it to my network attached storage. So we're going to do targets, dynamic discovery, add, and we're going to put the IP address of my network attached storage, which is 240.20, and hit OK. Right? It's going to say, hey, we should rescan this adapter. And we're going to okay. So we're going to hit some random buttons. I think we'll go to storage devices and hit this one and say, sure, rescan. So it's rescanning, and hopefully when it finishes scanning, oh, check that out, my OpenFiler iSCSI disk showed up. So now I have shared storage. So now I want to go back to this host, and I want to migrate it to my shared storage. And I'm going to pick iSCSI data store, hit next, and we're going to say change storage, leave VM. So the compute is going to stay on the same. We'll hit finish, and we'll see what happens. All right, it's copying my disk over to the shared storage. And it's going. I was kind of expecting this not to work because I was always under the impression that I needed to add the VM kernel adapter. This is a set connection type VM kernel adapter. So do I already have one of those? Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and add that because that's what I've always done, and I don't feel like having this fail later on. So we're going to add this VM network adapter. Take the default settings. We want to select vMotion. vMotion is what it is when you move the compute resources. You know, we're not going to do that yet. I hit cancel. I'm not going to do that yet because I want to see what happens when we try to move the host that is running the compute resources. So now my disk is on the iSCSI data source. So now if we think about what's going on, we have the compute running on this ESXi host, but the disk is actually stored on the network attached storage. So what we're going to do now is we're going to not use this VM because, as I said, it doesn't have a network interface. We're going to use not that one. We're going to use this one because it is on the iSCSI data score, and I can ping it. Let's make sure I can ping it. Let me make sure I can ping it in a hidden window before I do it in the real window. Oh, hey, check that out. So yeah, I can ping it. The ping is working. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to try to move the compute resources. And I'm not sure if this is going to work because I did not add a VM kernel interface in vMotion. And while we're moving it, we want to keep the ping up so we can see if it gets slower and if we lose any pings. So I'm connected actually over the VPN, so that's why my ping is kind of slow to begin with. So we're going to right-click. We're going to go migrate. We're going to go change compute resources only because the storage is already on the data store, the iSCSI data store. We're going to pick this host, and we're going to see, oh, there we go. Cool. The vMotion interface is not configured. So that was why we needed the VM kernel thing that I had you add in the previous step if you're following the lab sheet. So we're going to go ahead and add that now. VM kernel adapter, existing. We don't have any fancy network. We're going to do vMotion. Obtain IP settings automatically. Finish. All right, so now we'll wait for this to finish. All right, that finished. So now we will go and try to migrate our compute resources. Our ping's still running. And I'll bring that back up in a second, the ping. Compute resources, we're going to move it to the other host. Hey, compatibility check succeeded. Next. One problem you might run into when it does the checking, if you had a ISO connected to the CD drive of your VM and the ISO doesn't exist on the other host, then you might run into problems with that. So that's something to be aware of. We're going to do with high priority, whatever. Next, and we're going to finish, and it's going to copy our compute resources for that machine over to the other VM. We're going to watch the ping up. See, look, hey, it's getting slower. Oh, failed to migrate. Bad parameter. Yeah, bad parameter. That's a bad deal. So anyway, I had to stop the video because I spent about 2 minutes clicking around on random things trying to figure out why it wasn't working, and it didn't work, so it made me look foolish. So I stopped the video, figured out why it wasn't working, and now I'm back to tell you why it wasn't working. And if you'll remember, we added our VM kernel interface. Where was that? Add networking. We added this, and I'm like, oh, just pick some stuff, you know, click some things. Yeah. This was an important step that I just kind of skipped over. Obtain IPv4 settings automatically. That assumes that your VM kernel interface will be able to get an IP address from DHCP, which we do not have a DHCP server on this subnet, so it's not going to work. So you need to set use static IP, and you need to give it an IP address in that subnet that has the that is free. So you'll need to pick some IPs to put in there. I had already went back and fixed the ones I already had. So if you were following the podcast blindly and added what I added, here's how you fix it. You go click on your host, go to the config tab, go to VM kernel adapters, select the VM kernel network, and edit it, and click IPv4 settings and change that. I wonder if we could use our existing management network for vMotion, but I'm not going to try that now. We're going to use a separate one. Because in theory, we're doing this in the lab for fun. In theory, in the real world, you'll have a dedicated network that you use for vMotion. So this will be a different network connected to a different vSwitch that's connected to a different physical network. So we're going to go ahead and keep 2 of them because that's a better way to do it. So once we have actually fixed our stuff, now we can go ahead and migrate. Change compute resources, pick the other host, next, high priority, and then it wants to finish. We'll start our ping again. We'll look at our times. Hey, look at that. And we'll hit finish, and we'll find our ping. Did I hit finish? Finish, we'll find our ping. So now it should be going. Our ping should get a little slower. We should see some slower pings, maybe. There we go. That was a real slow ping. So it moved. We have a gig network this is running on. So it moved it pretty quickly, and we did not lose any pings. So that's pretty freaking awesome, if you ask me. We just moved our running virtual machine from one ESXi host to another without losing any pings. Pretty cool. So yeah, now we're gonna do that. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a cluster in our data center that allows our hosts to be treated as like one pool of compute resources instead of being individual ESXi hosts. We're gonna want to turn on DRS and vSphere HA, and we'll leave everything else default. And then we want to add host to our cluster. No. We don't want to add hosts. We want to move hosts because we already have hosts. Move hosts. So we'll move our 2 hosts into the cluster. So our hosts are in the cluster now. Yeah. Put all the host virtual machines in the cluster's root resource pool. Yeah, that's fine. Yes. So now if we look, things are going to look a little different when this finishes, I think. So now our hosts just show up, and then our VMs show up, and they're not necessarily, I mean, they are running on one particular host, ESXi host at this point, but it's not shown in that view because we're viewing this as like a pool of resources, not necessarily a individual host. So once this is done, so now we look, things look a little different. So yeah. So now we can click to see which ones are on. But the thing about this, I don't know what that error is. Probably complaining about not having 2 NICs or something. Yeah, the number of HA heartbeat data stores for this host is probably, I didn't read those words. Suppress may, yes. So maybe that's not the only warning. Anyway, you can dig around and see if you can find out what the other warning is. So now, in theory, we're at the point where we have HA, high availability on, and distributed resource scheduling. We're not going to try to exercise distributed resource scheduling. In theory, what that means is if one of these hosts gets too busy, it'll automatically move the host around. What we're going to do is we're going to kill one of the hosts and see if the VM automatically comes up on the other host. And we'll wait for this reconfigure task to finish because I don't even know I started that. All right, while that's going, we'll talk about a few other things. Another couple other cool things we can do with vCenter Server that you can't do without vCenter Server is we can, not that one, we can clone a VM. So this is going to make a new copy of the VM, cloned CentOS. We'll put it in the cluster. You know, we always want to make sure it's the same format as source, but we probably always want to make sure we select thin provision. We'll put it on the iSCSI data store. We could do some other things. I don't know what all this stuff does, so we're not going to mess with those right now. You can mess with those in the lab if you want. So then we'll finish, and we should end up with a clone copy of that VM once we're done. Problem with the cloned copy is it will probably have the same IP address, so when you bring it up, you will create network issues for the other one. So you probably want to take some special care when bringing that cloned machine up. Maybe you have a special network, a dev network that you connect it to instead of the VM network that the other VMs are connected to, and you can change the IP address without causing any issues. So that's how you clone a VM. The next thing we're going to look at is creating a template. So the good thing about a template is that if you make something a template, we want to convert to template, but it's like grayed out. So you have to turn it off to convert it to a template. So we'll turn this one off. I'm just going to kill the power because that's how I roll. Power that one off. Our clone finished, so we could turn our clone on and do some stuff, but we're not going to do that because it probably has the same IP address. So now that this is finished, you know, we could go template, convert to template. And the good thing about a template, creating a template, is that you, hey, a template is let's read this. A template is a master image of a virtual machine that we use to create new virtual machines. So the good thing about the template is you can't turn it on. There's no way to turn this on because it's a template. If you want to create a new VM, then it's the same process as cloning. You just do new VM from this template. And this is probably what you would want to do in the real world if you had about 1 million servers you need to create all the time. You'd want to have a template that you could work from. But you know, even if you have a template, you're going to need to update it periodically. So you want to be able to power it on. So if you want to do that, then you need to convert it back to a virtual machine. Convert it back to a virtual machine. And then once it's back to a virtual machine, then you can power it on, apply the updates, and then convert it back to a template after you turn it back off. So that is pretty much a very in-depth overview of what we're doing in the lab. Pretty much shows you exactly everything you need to do to be successful, which is not something I like doing, but there it is.